You will not believe what happens to the girl at the end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue writing stories like this one. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Dusty Gulch was a town like any other in the West. A saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and enough tumbleweeds to keep things interesting. But what truly held Dusty Gulch together were the people, and among them none were more respected than Rancher Jed and Sheriff Clem. Jedediah Jed Strongarm was a man built like an oak, weathered by the sun and wind, with a heart as big as his ranch. He knew every inch of his land, every head of cattle, and every neighbor for miles around. He wasn't a man to back down from a fight, but he was also known for his fairness and generosity. Clement Clem Mallory, on the other hand, was the law in Dusty Gulch. Tall and lean, with eyes that missed nothing, he had a quiet authority that commanded respect. He'd been a lawman for years, seen his share of trouble, and always managed to keep the peace, usually with a kind word and a firm hand, but always with justice in mind. Jed and Clem were more than just respected figures. They were lifelong friends. They'd grown up together, fished in the creek, chased rabbits in the fields, and even shared their first sips of whiskey behind the saloon. They trusted each other implicitly, a bond forged in shared experiences and mutual respect. Their friendship was a cornerstone of Dusty Gulch, a symbol of unity in a sometimes harsh and unforgiving land. They'd seen each other through thick and thin, a wildfire that threatened Jed's ranch, a stagecoach robbery that nearly cost Clem his life. They were as close as brothers, and their camaraderie was something the whole town relied on. Every Sunday, they'd meet on the porch of the general store to play checkers, offering advice and a listening ear to anyone who needed it. Children would gather around, fascinated by their stories, and the old-timers would nod in approval, knowing that as long as Jed and Clem were together, Dusty Gulch was in good hands. But even the strongest bonds can be tested, and the quiet harmony of Dusty Gulch was about to be shattered by a missing calf, a misunderstanding, and the loose tongue of a drunk. The events that followed would challenge Jed and Clem's friendship, divide the town, and ultimately reveal the true meaning of forgiveness and community. The dry wind carried whispers of trouble, and the sun beat down on Dusty Gulch, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. The day started like any other. Jed rose with the sun, the smell of coffee and bacon already wafting from the kitchen. He ate a hearty breakfast, said goodbye to his wife, Martha, and headed out to the range. The cattle were grazing peacefully, the calves frolicking in the morning light. But as Jed rode further out, counting heads, a knot formed in his stomach. One of his best calves, a young heifer with a distinctive white patch on its forehead, was missing. Jed knew that losing a calf was more than just a financial blow, it was a threat to his livelihood, a sign of potential trouble. Rustlers had been known to operate in the area, preying on vulnerable ranchers. He scanned the horizon, his eyes searching for any sign of disturbance, broken fences, fresh tracks, anything that might give him a clue. But there was nothing. Just the endless expanse of the open range. He rode back to the ranch house, his mind racing. He knew he had to report the missing calf, and there was only one man he trusted to handle it, Sheriff Clem. He hitched his horse in front of the sheriff's office, the familiar creak of the wooden porch a small comfort in his growing unease. Clem was sitting at his desk, a stack of papers in front of him, a half-empty cup of coffee at his elbow. He looked up as Jed entered, a smile creasing his weathered face. "Morning, Jed. What brings you to town so early?" Jed didn't waste any time. "Clem, I've got a problem. One of my calves is missing. I think it's rustlers." Clem leaned back in his chair, his expression turning serious. "Rustlers, huh? That's not good. Tell me everything." Jed recounted his morning, describing the missing calf, the lack of any obvious signs of trouble, and his growing suspicion that someone had made off with it. Clem listened intently, nodding occasionally, his eyes focused on Jed's face. "All right, Jed," Clem said when Jed was finished. "I'll look into it. I'll ride out to your place, take a look around, see if I can find any tracks. I promise I'll do everything I can to find your calf." Jed appreciated Clem's reassurance, but he couldn't shake the feeling that time was of the essence. Every hour that passed increased the chances that the calf would be lost forever, either driven far away or, worse, butchered for meat. The thought made his blood boil. He needed Clem to understand the urgency of the situation, to treat this as more than just a routine missing livestock report. This was his livelihood, his family's future, and he wasn't about to let it be stolen without a fight. He trusted Clem, he really did, but the fear of losing everything was beginning to gnaw at him. Clem, true to his word, rode out to Jed's ranch later that morning. He spent hours scouring the area where the calf had last been seen, carefully examining the ground for tracks, checking the fences for any signs of damage. He even questioned some of Jed's ranch hands, but no one had seen anything suspicious. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the range, Clem returned to the ranch house, his face grim. "I'm sorry, Jed," he said. "I couldn't find anything. No tracks, no broken fences, nothing." Jed's frustration boiled over. "Nothing? You found nothing? A calf doesn't just disappear into thin air, Clem. You need to do more than just ride around and look." Clem's jaw tightened. "I did everything I could, Jed. I know this is important to you, but I can't just conjure up evidence out of nowhere. Maybe if you spent less time sitting behind your desk and more time actually policing this town, things like this wouldn't happen." Jed retorted, his voice rising. Clem stood his ground, his eyes narrowing. "Are you accusing me of not doing my job, Jed? I'm saying that maybe you're not taking this seriously enough." Jed shot back. "Maybe you're too busy playing checkers and drinking coffee to care about a rancher who's trying to make an honest living." The air crackled with tension. Martha, who had been watching from the porch, stepped forward, her face etched with concern. "Jed, please," she pleaded, "don't say things you'll regret." But Jed was beyond reason. "It's always something, isn't it, Clem? You're always too busy, or too tired, or too something to actually help. Maybe you're just favoring some of the other ranchers, the ones who bring you a little something extra at Christmas." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Clem's face flushed crimson. "That's a low blow, Jed. I've never taken a bribe in my life, and you know it." "Do I?" Jed challenged, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do I really know you, Clem? Or have you changed so much that you're not the man I thought you were?" Clem's eyes flashed with anger. "Maybe you're the one who's changed, Jed. Maybe you're so blinded by your own greed that you can't see straight." The two men stood face to face, their friendship hanging by a thread, the missing calf a symbol of the growing rift between them. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the ranch into darkness, mirroring the darkness that had descended upon their relationship. Martha watched helplessly, tears welling in her eyes, as the foundation of Dusty Gulch began to crumble. The quarrel between Jed and Clem didn't stay confined to Jed's ranch. Like a wildfire in dry grass, it spread quickly through Dusty Gulch. The next morning, the tension was palpable. Folks whispered in the general store, avoided eye contact on the street, and chose sides with a fervor that surprised even themselves. At the saloon, the usual boisterous atmosphere was replaced by a strained silence. Men who had shared drinks and stories for years now sat at separate tables, glaring at each other across the room. The barkeep, a burly man named Gus, tried to keep the peace, but even his booming voice couldn't drown out the undercurrent of animosity. Those who sided with Jed felt he had a right to be angry. He was a hard-working rancher who had lost a valuable calf, and Clem, as sheriff, should have done more to help. They muttered about Clem's laziness and his supposed favoritism towards the wealthier ranchers in the area, echoing Jed's accusations. On the other side were those who defended Clem. They argued that he was a fair and honest lawman who had always done his best to protect the town. They pointed out that Jed was being unreasonable, letting his anger cloud his judgment. They whispered that Jed was always quick to anger and slow to forgive. Even families were divided. Husbands and wives argued over dinner, children took sides based on their parents' allegiances, and friendships were strained to the breaking point. Dusty Gulch, once a close-knit community, was now a town torn apart by suspicion and resentment. The tension affected everything. Business slowed down as people avoided each other. Church attendance dwindled as families stayed home to avoid potential confrontations. Even the weather seemed to reflect the town's mood, with dark clouds gathering overhead and a persistent, mournful wind blowing through the streets. Martha, heartbroken by the rift between her husband and his best friend, tried to mediate, but her efforts were futile. Jed, consumed by his anger and sense of betrayal, refused to listen to reason. Clem, hurt and offended by Jed's accusations, remained stubbornly silent. Dusty Gulch held its breath, waiting for the storm to break, unsure if the town or the friendship between Jed and Clem could ever be repaired. The missing calf, now almost forgotten in the midst of the larger conflict, had become a symbol of everything that was wrong in Dusty Gulch, a catalyst for the unraveling of a community. The days that followed would be long and difficult, testing the resilience of the town and the strength of its people. Amidst the simmering resentment and divided loyalties, life in Dusty Gulch continued, albeit with a heavy heart. The saloon, despite the strained atmosphere, remained the town's central gathering place, the one constant in a world turned upside down. It was here, in the dimly lit corner amidst the clinking glasses and hushed conversations, that old man Hemlock usually resided. Hemlock was a fixture of Dusty Gulch, a man whose life revolved around the bottom of a whiskey bottle. He was a harmless old codger, mostly incoherent, mumbling to himself and occasionally offering cryptic pronouncements that no one ever understood. He'd lost his wife years ago, and the loneliness had driven him to drink, turning him into a shadow of his former self. Most folks just ignored him, considering him a harmless eccentric, a sad reminder of the ravages of time and alcohol. But even a broken clock is right twice a day, and even old man Hemlock had his moments of lucidity, fleeting glimpses of the man he once was. And it was during one of these rare moments, fueled by a potent combination of cheap whiskey and a sudden surge of guilt, that he unknowingly held the key to restoring peace to Dusty Gulch. One evening, as the saloon buzzed with whispered arguments and furtive glances, Hemlock sat in his usual corner, nursing a glass of whiskey and muttering to himself. But tonight, his mumbling was different. Tonight, his words were clearer, more coherent, and they carried a weight that caught the attention of a few nearby patrons. "Finest piece of beef," he mumbled, his voice raspy and low. "Finest piece ever did see. Perfect for winter." At first, no one paid much attention. Hemlock often mumbled about food, a common side effect of his constant hunger and alcohol-addled brain. But then he repeated the phrase, louder this time, his eyes glazed over with a mixture of regret and fear. "Finest piece of beef. Shouldn't have done it. Poor lil' thing." A few heads turned, curiosity piqued. Gus, the barkeep, leaned over the counter, his brow furrowed. "What's the you say, Hemlock?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Something about beef." Hemlock looked up, his eyes unfocused, his face a mask of confusion. "Beef," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Aye, beef. For winter." The whispers in the saloon died down, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Everyone knew that winter was coming, and everyone knew that meat was scarce. And everyone knew about Jed's missing calf. The pieces began to fall into place, slowly, tentatively, like a fragile house of cards. Could it be? Could old man Hemlock know something about the missing calf? The thought hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. A potential turning point in the drama that had engulfed Dusty Gulch. Gus, sensing the shift in the saloon's atmosphere, decided to press Hemlock further. He poured the old man another shot of whiskey, hoping to loosen his tongue even more. "Hemlock," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You said something about beef. Whose beef are you talking about?" Hemlock took a long swig of the whiskey, his eyes fluttering shut for a moment. When he opened them again, they seemed a little clearer, a little more focused. "Jed's," he mumbled, the word barely audible. "Jed's calf." A gasp rippled through the saloon. All eyes were now fixed on Hemlock, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and horror. Jed's calf? Could it be true? Had this drunken old man somehow been involved in the disappearance of Jed's prized heifer? Gus leaned closer, his hand resting on the counter, ready to intervene if things got out of hand. "Hemlock," he said, his voice low and steady, Did you take Jed's calf?" Hemlock's face crumpled, his eyes filling with tears. "Didn't mean to," he sobbed, his voice thick with emotion. Thought it was stray. Needed meat. For winter." The confession hung in the air, heavy and damning. Hemlock, in his drunken stupor, had mistaken Jed's calf for a stray and butchered it for meat. The implications were staggering. Not only had Jed lost his calf, but the source of the town's division, the cause of the bitter feud between Jed and Clem, had been nothing more than a tragic misunderstanding fueled by alcohol and desperation. The silence in the saloon was broken only by Hemlock's sobs. Gus, stunned by the revelation, didn't know what to do. He looked around at the faces of the patrons, their expressions mirroring his own shock and disbelief. Someone needed to tell Jed, someone needed to tell Clem. But who would be the one to break the news? And how would they react? Finally, a young man named Billy, who had always admired both Jed and Clem, stepped forward. "I'll go," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'll tell them what happened." Gus nodded, relief washing over his face. "Be careful, Billy," he warned. "They're both hurting. This might not be easy." Billy took a deep breath and headed out of the saloon, the weight of the town's hopes and fears resting on his young shoulders. The truth was out, but the consequences were yet to be seen. Would Hemlock's confession heal the rift between Jed and Clem, or would it only deepen the divide? The fate of Dusty Gulch hung in the balance, dependent on the reactions of two men and the willingness of a community to forgive. The night was far from over, and the storm that had been brewing over Dusty Gulch was about to unleash its full fury. Billy's first stop was Jed's ranch. The house was dark, save for a single lamp burning in the living room. He knocked hesitantly, his heart pounding in his chest. Martha answered the door, her face drawn and weary. "Billy," she said, her voice soft. What brings you out here so late? Mrs. Strongarm, Billy began, his voice trembling. I have some news about the calf. Martha's eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting within them. They found it? Is it all right? Billy took a deep breath. It's not good news, ma'am. You need to get Jed. Martha's face paled. She nodded slowly and disappeared into the house, returning a moment later with Jed, his face etched with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. What is it, Billy? Jed demanded, his voice gruff. What's going on? Billy recounted the events in the saloon, repeating Hemlock's confession word for word. As he spoke, Jed's face went through a range of emotions, disbelief, anger, and finally, a dawning realization of the terrible mistake that had been made. Hemlock, Jed said, his voice barely a whisper. That drunken old fool butchered my calf. Martha placed a hand on his arm, her touch calming him slightly. Jed, she said softly, it was a mistake. He didn't mean to. A mistake. Jed roared, his anger flaring again. A mistake that cost me a valuable calf. A mistake that tore this town apart. But it wasn't rustlers, Jed, Billy interjected, his voice pleading. It wasn't Clem favoring anyone. It was just a terrible accident. Jed stared at Billy for a long moment, his eyes searching the young man's face for any sign of deceit. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. All right, Billy, he said, his voice subdued. I believe you, but that doesn't change anything. My calf is still gone, and this town is still divided. Billy nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. I know, Mr. Strongarm, he said, but maybe this is a chance to start over, a chance to forgive and forget. Jed looked at Martha, her eyes filled with hope and a silent plea for reconciliation. He knew she was right. He couldn't let his anger consume him any longer. He had to find a way to forgive Hemlock, to forgive Clem, and to heal the wounds that had been inflicted on Dusty Gulch. All right, Billy, he said, a glimmer of resolve in his eyes. Let's go talk to Clem. The two men mounted their horses and rode off into the night, leaving Martha standing on the porch, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of optimism. Perhaps, just perhaps, Dusty Gulch could find its way back to peace. Clem was sitting in his office, the lamplight casting long shadows across the room. He hadn't been able to sleep, the argument with Jed replaying in his mind over and over again. He knew he hadn't handled things perfectly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Jed had been unfair, letting his anger blind him to the truth. He was startled by a knock on the door. Come in, he said, his voice weary. The door opened and Jed stepped inside, followed by Billy. Clem's eyes narrowed. What do you want, Jed? He asked, his voice cold. We need to talk, Clem, Jed said, his voice surprisingly calm. Clem raised an eyebrow but gestured for them to sit down. Billy recounted Hemlock's confession, just as he had done for Jed. Clem listened in stunned silence, his face growing paler with each word. Hemlock, Clem said when Billy was finished. Old man Hemlock butchered your calf? Jed nodded, his expression grim. That's what he says. Billy hurted himself. Clem ran a hand through his hair, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe it. All this time, all this anger and resentment had been based on a tragic misunderstanding. He looked at Jed, his eyes filled with remorse. Jed, he said, his voice choked with emotion, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. I should have. It doesn't matter now, Clem, Jed interrupted, his voice surprisingly gentle. What's done is done. The important thing is that we know the truth. Clem looked at Jed, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had expected anger, accusations, perhaps even violence. But instead, he saw forgiveness, understanding, and a willingness to move forward. I was wrong, Clem, Jed continued, his voice sincere. I let my anger get the better of me. I said things I didn't mean. I accused you of things that weren't true. I'm sorry. Clem stood up and walked over to Jed, extending his hand. I was wrong too, Jed, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I should have listened to you more. I should have taken your concerns more seriously. I'm sorry for letting you down. Jed grasped Clem's hand, their grip firm and unwavering. The years of friendship, the shared experiences, the mutual respect, all came flooding back, washing away the anger and resentment that had threatened to destroy them. So, Jed said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. What do we do now? Clem smiled back, his eyes twinkling. Now, he said, we figure out how to make things right. not just for us, but for the whole town. The first step was admitting their mistake, not just to each other, but to everyone in Dusty Gulch. They had to show the town that they were ready to move forward, to rebuild their friendship, and to restore peace to their community. And they knew just how to do it. The next morning, Jed and Clem walked into the saloon, side by side, an unusual sight that immediately silenced the room. All eyes were on them, waiting to see what would happen. Gus, the barkeep, leaned over the counter, his face etched with cautious optimism. Jed stepped forward, his voice clear and strong. "Folks," he said, "Clem and I have something to say." He paused, taking a deep breath. "We were wrong. We let our anger and pride get the better of us, and we allowed a misunderstanding to tear this town apart." Clem nodded in agreement. "It turns out that Jed's calf wasn't stolen by rustlers, and I wasn't favoring anyone. Old Man Hemlock mistook it for a stray and butchered it for meat." A murmur rippled through the saloon. Disbelief, shock, and a glimmer of hope filled the faces of the patrons. "We're sorry," Jed continued, his voice sincere. "We're sorry for the accusations, for the anger, for the way we let this situation divide us. We were friends for too long to let something like this come between us." Clem stepped forward, placing a hand on Jed's shoulder. "We're going to make things right," he said. "First, Hemlock will be held accountable for his actions. He'll be fined for butchering Jed's calf." A few grumbles could be heard, but Jed quickly silenced them. "That's not all," he said. "Clem and I have decided to split the fine money. Half will go to me to help offset the loss of the calf, and the other half will go to the town to help those in need." The murmurs turned into approving nods. It was a fair and just solution, one that acknowledged the wrong that had been done while also giving back to the community. "But that's not all either," Clem added, a twinkle in his eye. "To show our commitment to rebuilding this town, Jed has generously donated a steer. We're going to have a town-wide stew, a celebration of forgiveness and unity." A cheer erupted from the saloon, the sound echoing through the streets of Dusty Gulch. The tension that had gripped the town for so long finally began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of hope and optimism. "The stew will be tomorrow," Jed announced, his voice filled with warmth. "Everyone is welcome. Let's put this behind us and start fresh." The patrons of the saloon began to clap and cheer, their faces beaming with joy. The rift between Jed and Clem had been healed, and in doing so, they had paved the way for the healing of Dusty Gulch. The storm had passed, and the sun was finally beginning to shine again. The road ahead would not be easy, but with Jed and Clem leading the way, the town was ready to face it together. The first step had been taken, and the journey to reconciliation had begun. The day of the stew dawned bright and clear, as if even the heavens were celebrating the newfound peace in Dusty Gulch. The entire town gathered in the town square, a space that had been eerily empty just days before. Tables were set up, laden with food contributed by the townsfolk: cornbread, beans, salads, and pies of every variety. The air was filled with the tantalizing aroma of the steer stewing in a large pot over an open fire. Jed and Clem, working side by side, stirred the stew, their easy camaraderie a welcome sight for the townsfolk. They laughed and joked with each other, their friendship seemingly stronger than ever. The children ran around, playing tag and laughing, their carefree joy a stark contrast to the somber mood that had gripped the town. Old Man Hemlock, looking sheepish and contrite, sat on a bench near the edge of the square. He had paid his fine, a hefty sum that left him practically penniless, but he seemed relieved to have atoned for his mistake. Jed approached him, a bowl of stew in his hand. "Hemlock," Jed said, his voice gentle, "I know you didn't mean any harm. Here, have some stew." Hemlock looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jed," he mumbled, accepting the bowl. "I'm truly sorry for what I did." "It's all right, Hemlock," Jed said, patting him on the shoulder. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from them." As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the town square, Jed and Clem stood on a makeshift stage, addressing the crowd. "Folks," Jed began, "today is a day for celebration. A day for forgiveness. A day for unity. We've been through a tough time," Clem added, "but we've come out stronger on the other side. We've learned that communication, understanding, and forgiveness are the keys to a strong community." They raised their bowls of stew in a toast. "To Dusty Gulch," they said in unison, "may we never forget the lessons we've learned, and may our friendship and community continue to thrive for years to come." The crowd cheered, raising their own bowls in response. As they ate the stew, sharing stories and laughter, a sense of peace and contentment settled over Dusty Gulch. The town had been tested, but it had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. The missing calf had brought them to the brink of destruction, but in the end, it had also brought them closer together. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the people of Dusty Gulch knew that they were truly blessed to be a part of such a resilient and loving community. The fresh steer, now nourishing the town, was a symbol of their fresh start. The weeks that followed the town stew were filled with a renewed sense of purpose and cooperation in Dusty Gulch. The townsfolk, inspired by Jed and Clem's example, worked together to repair the damage that had been done, both physically and emotionally. Fences were mended, disagreements were settled, and friendships were rekindled. Jed and Clem, their bond stronger than ever, resumed their Sunday checker games on the porch of the general store. The children gathered around once again, eager to hear their stories, and the old-timers nodded in approval, knowing that Dusty Gulch was in good hands. Clem, determined to be a more attentive sheriff, organized town meetings to address the concerns of the residents. He listened patiently to their complaints, offering solutions and support. He also established a neighborhood watch program, encouraging the townsfolk to look out for one another. Jed, inspired by Martha's compassion, became more involved in community affairs. He volunteered his time and resources to help those in need, offering food, shelter, and a helping hand to anyone who asked. He also made it a point to visit Old Man Hemlock regularly, sharing a meal and offering words of encouragement. Hemlock, humbled by the experience, vowed to change his ways. He drastically reduced his alcohol consumption and began to take an active interest in the town. He helped with chores, ran errands, and offered his wisdom to anyone who would listen. He became a valuable member of the community, proving that even the most unlikely individuals can find redemption. The town square, once a symbol of division, became a hub of activity. The townsfolk organized dances, picnics, and festivals celebrating their unity and resilience. They planted trees and flowers, beautifying the space and creating a welcoming environment for all. Dusty Gulch had learned a valuable lesson that even the strongest communities can be tested by misunderstandings and disagreements, but that with communication, forgiveness, and a willingness to work together, any obstacle can be overcome. The missing calf had been a catalyst for conflict, but in the end, it had also been a catalyst for growth, bringing the people of Dusty Gulch closer together and forging a bond that would last for generations to come. The town was more than just a collection of buildings and businesses. It was a family bound by a shared history, a common purpose, and an unwavering commitment to one another. And as the sun set each evening, casting a warm glow over the town, the people of Dusty Gulch knew that they were truly home. They were safe, they were loved, and they were part of something special, something that no misunderstanding or disagreement could ever destroy. The town had been given a fresh start, and they were determined to make the most of it. Years passed in Dusty Gulch, filled with prosperity and peace. The memory of the missing calf and the ensuing quarrel faded into a distant reminder of the importance of communication and forgiveness. Jed and Clem remained the pillars of the community, their friendship a shining example of resilience and understanding. Every year, on the anniversary of the town stew, Dusty Gulch held a celebration in the town square. The townsfolk gathered, sharing stories and laughter, and Jed and Clem, side by side, would serve stew to everyone, a symbolic act of unity and forgiveness. Children who had only heard stories of the Great Quarrel would look up at Jed and Clem with awe and respect, knowing that they were witnessing a bond that had weathered the storm and emerged stronger than ever. The old-timers would smile knowingly, remembering the dark days and appreciating the peace that had been restored. Old Man Hemlock, now a respected elder in the community, would sit on a bench watching the festivities with a twinkle in his eye. He had become a living testament to the power of redemption, a reminder that even the most unlikely individuals can find their place in the world. Martha, her heart filled with joy, would watch Jed and Clem with pride, knowing that their friendship had not only saved Dusty Gulch but had also inspired countless others to forgive and to heal. As the sun set each evening, casting a warm golden glow over Dusty Gulch, the town seemed to hum with a sense of contentment and gratitude. The people had learned that true strength lies not in avoiding conflict, but in overcoming it with compassion and understanding. They had discovered that forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, but a powerful act of courage and resilience. And they had realized that community is not just a place, but a family bound together by a shared history, a common purpose, and an unwavering commitment to one another. And so, Dusty Gulch continued to thrive, a beacon of hope and unity in a world often filled with division and strife. The story of the missing calf became a legend, a reminder of the importance of friendship, forgiveness, and the enduring power of community. And as the stars twinkled in the night sky, the people of Dusty Gulch knew that they were truly blessed to be a part of such a special place, a place where even the most unlikely misunderstandings could lead to the most profound acts of healing and reconciliation. The story of the rancher and the sheriff, the missing calf, and the drunken confession would be told and retold for generations to come, a testament to the enduring spirit of Dusty Gulch and the unwavering power of the human heart. Dusty Gulch was truly home, a place where even a quarrel over a lost calf could pave the way for a brighter future filled with peace, unity, and everlasting friendship.